Great pleasure right now to welcome to our book talk segment. Man's written a very interesting book about a very interesting guy. It's called The Close Encounters Man, How One Man Made the World Believe in UFOs. And we're joined today by a very accomplished man in his own right, Mark O'Connell. You've seen his work on television. He's written great episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation and Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And Mark O'Connell joined us by telephone today. Mark, good to talk with you. How are you?
I'm fantastic. How are you?
I'm doing great. Good to have a chance to chat with you for a couple of minutes about somebody I have to say I did not know anything about when I got the book. I always didn't know a lot about Dr. J. Allen Hynek. That's his name, and kind of interesting man because at one time he was put into, I guess his job was to kind of debunk UFOs, but later on realized, hey, there might be something to this, right?
Yeah, that's right, and that's what made him such an interesting person to write about. It's one of the reasons I wanted to write this book, because his transformation from skeptic to believer is a really kind of a wild story, and it involves pop culture and modern science and all sorts of really interesting facets of our world that he had an influence on. And as you said, when he first started working for the Air Force in the late 1940s, he had one and only one job, and that was to debunk UFO reports. Because basically, the Air Force didn't know what to do with these UFO reports. They were getting hundreds of reports daily from all over the country, from people in all walks of life. And unfortunately for the Air Force, a lot of the witnesses were military people and law enforcement people and, highly credible observers and reporters. And the Air Force just didn't know what to do with these reports, but they had to do something because they were becoming a huge embarrassment. The Air Force, the Air Force their job is to keep our airspace safe and clear, and here were these strange objects invading our airspace at will at any time they wanted, and the Air Force couldn't explain it, and they couldn't catch these things, and so they needed a credible, mild-mannered scientist to back them up, basically, to take a look at all these UFO reports and say, oh yeah, this person was obviously looking at Venus. This person was obviously looking at a meteor. And so Hynek was able to successfully explain away about 80% of the Air Force's UFO reports, which at first Hynek thought he was actually doing really, really well. He thought if you can explain away 80% of these, you're doing all right. But over time, over the course of several years, he realized that he started to notice, wait a minute, year after year, there's this residue of about 20% of these cases that I can't explain. And that started to really bother him. It bothered him that he couldn't explain these reports and that this 20% ratio was consistent throughout time. And that's what really got him to start thinking, you know what, there may be more to this. We should really apply some resources and some rigorous scientific study to these 20% of these cases that we can't explain. So that's when his transformation sort of began in the early 1950s, when he started to change his mind about UFOs.
You always hear, and you talk about it in the book, explanations. And I never heard the term swamp gas, applied to anything other than, maybe UFOs. I mean, that might be something. Or just the Air Force has this experimental thing they're flying around, but they don't want to tell you about. That seems to be the two explanations you hear a lot.
Yeah, and you know what? In some cases, they're true, but very few cases. The swamp gas. I'm glad you brought up the swamp gas case, because that makes up a big part of the book, because that was kind of the defining moment of Hynek's career in UFO research, because he made himself very, very unpopular. Most UFO enthusiasts firmly believe to this day that the people in Michigan who saw these UFOs in 1966 were actually seeing real spacecraft. And they feel that way because there were over 100 witnesses, and the witnesses were all very credible. They included law enforcement officers and a county civil defense agent and college professors. And Hynek went to Michigan, and he researched these sightings for 3 days, and he came to the conclusion that these people were most likely looking at swamp gas. So my analysis of this case is that Hynek was absolutely right to say that it was most likely swamp gas. He didn't say it was absolutely swamp gas, but he said indications are strong that these people all saw swamp gas. And it became a huge, huge issue because the people of Michigan were furious with him, because here's the country's #1 UFO expert basically calling the people of Michigan a bunch of fools who can't tell swamp gas from a spaceship. And they had a right to be upset, but at the same time, as I said, I truly believe that Hynek said the exact right thing. He was a man who went to exactly where the facts led him, and in this case, they led him to swamp gas. So when you say that's a common explanation for UFOs, yeah, it's also probably the most famous write-off of UFOs in history. But in this case, as I say, in my opinion, it was absolutely correct.
It seems to me, just when I was a kid, there was a lot of these movies or TV shows that, or even books that had these kind of real lame pictures of UFOs. It looked like somebody just threw a pipe tin in the air and took a picture of it. So a lot of that kind of, I guess, made people this kind of made a joke out of it almost. But I mean, people really believe that they've seen these things, that they're real. So it's not only a joke, but it's truth to some people, isn't it?
Oh yeah, yeah. And to a lot of people, I over the course of my work on this book and my work as a UFO field investigator, which I've done for several years, I've kind of discovered, I've learned to, I'm not afraid to talk about UFOs openly in public, because what usually happens when I do is somebody who I'm talking to or somebody who's listening in on the conversation, after a while they'll say, kind of shyly, they'll say, I saw something weird once. I've never told anybody about it. And, you start operating that way. You just sort of bring it up in discussions and make it part of a normal conversation. And you would be amazed how many people speak up and say, I saw something. We were just at a graduation party at a friend's house over the weekend, and 3 or 4 people, when they heard about my book, 3 or 4 people sitting around this picnic table said, well, actually, they were all family, so they all sort of started pointing fingers at each other, and they were like, hey, Dad saw something weird once. Hey, my aunt saw something weird once. So before I know it, I've got 3 or 4 people telling me these really great UFO stories from their past, and they've never told anybody about these before outside of the family.
I know a couple of astronauts that people know about. Gordon Cooper, I believe, was one, and Edgar Mitchell another. They say they saw things, and they were kind of put aside, I guess, right? I mean, people weren't believing them, but if astronauts saw something, you think there's something there, right?
Well, I mean, obviously they make pretty credible witnesses, because they earned the right to be astronauts by being, exceptionally skilled at decision making, and examining the environment around them. Those are life or death skills for an astronaut. And so for an astronaut to say, well, I saw something strange once out of the window of my space capsule, I think you have to listen to that person. And I think, the two you mentioned, Mitchell and Cooper, they sort of, I think in some cases they've gone a little beyond UFO and they've started talking in more spiritual terms, which is something Hynek did as well. And that isn't always well received. I think some people sort of start to think, okay, now you're sounding crazy. And so they dismiss everything the person says, which is unfortunate, but I think it's human nature. But yeah, I think people like Apollo astronauts, when they talk about things they've seen in space, I think we should listen to them. I think they have really interesting stories to tell.
Yeah, no doubt. I know we have limited time. We're just about out, but it really is a fascinating book. Again, The Close Encounters Man, of course, that title refers to the movie Steven Spielberg made, and based some of it off of Dr. Hynek's life. And The Close Encounters Man, How One Man Made the World Believe in UFOs is the name of the book. And Mark, you have a website you want to direct people to, get more information about the book?
Well, they can go to the HarperCollins website. They can also find the book on Amazon, of course. And to find out more about my work, they can read my UFO blog, which is High Strangeness UFO, all one word, highstrangenessufo.com.
Great. Mark O'Connell, pleasure talking to you. Hopefully we can do it again. Thanks for being with us today.
I'd love that. Thanks for having me in today.
I'm Stan Brock. 30 years ago, I formed Remote Area Medical to help people overseas. But then we found generations of families in America isolated by poverty from the health care they need. Together, we can take dental, vision, and medical help to 1 million adults and their kids, right here at home in the United States of America.
If you'd like to order the book we're talking about, please go to DougMilesMedia.com and enter the author's name in the Amazon search box. Thank you for listening. Please come back soon for more conversations here at DougMilesMedia.com. This has been a presentation of Doug Miles Media, all rights reserved. You can listen to or download previous programs at iTunes, Stitcher.com, or DougMilesMedia.com.